This is a rebroadcast of a classic Murder in the Black episode, thoughtfully enhanced with improved audio and video for our listeners. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It's your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
Let's get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, and your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it.
Women disproportionately feel unsafe in public spaces and must meticulously plan their movements, from texting friends upon arrival to avoiding walking alone. In contrast, men generally do not have to be as vigilant or make such sacrifices to their freedom and spontaneity. This disparity highlights the inequalities women face, where they must constantly be on guard to protect themselves. Tragically, the need for such caution is well justified, as women are far more likely to experience sexual assault, harassment, and other forms of violence. The community has a responsibility to ensure the safety of all its members, not just placing the burden on women to defend themselves. By acknowledging these challenges and working together to create a safer environment, we can empower women to live and move freely without fear. Hopefully, this case will highlight why women need to be protected.
So our case for today is about Deanna Cook. Now, Deanna Cook was born and raised in South Dallas, Texas, and she was the first born to her mother. She had beautiful chocolate brown skin. She was tall with a track-like physique. And she was, in fact, a track star. She received many accolades in the track world, but at the age of 16, she gave birth to her first daughter, Anicia. And shortly after she had Anicia, she gave birth to another daughter, Anaya. Now, Deanna was fiercely passionate and loved her girls hard. And she did everything to provide for them in a way that any loving mother would. She did get married twice. She had 2 failed marriages, but in spite of many of her challenges that she had, both in marriage and mental health challenges that she faced, she still had this go-getter, get up and try by any means necessary to provide a life for her daughters that she wanted them to have. Began to change her life around and do things that would provide for her daughters in a way that she really wanted to provide for them. One of those things was she began to blog and began to write a book about her life. And so she was one of those people that loved social media, and she used social media to its fullest extent. She particularly loved Twitter, and she placed many of her thoughts and ideas and what she was doing all on social media. And she did this also. She also video blogged because she wanted to create this book that she had envisioned. She also got really active in church and was just trying to change her life for the better, because she wanted, again, to provide this life for her daughters that she really had envisioned for them. On August 16th, as Deanna is preparing to work, she decides to post on social media. And what she says on social media definitely would have made some of her followers pause. She states, "Morning world, heading to work, hoping when I get off, my home won't be broken in. I have a stalker." Now, if I was following Deanna, this definitely would have made me pause, because there was no prior mention of a stalker in any of her previous tweets. And her family and friends were not following her on Twitter, so they weren't even made aware of this. Deanna goes to work. She completes her day like normal. She comes home, and that evening she talks to one of her daughters on the phone. Now, her daughters weren't staying with her at the time. They were staying with her mother because Deanna was trying, again, to prepare this life for her children. And she had just recently bought this house with this pool in the backyard, and she was trying to get everything prepared for her girls to come back and live with her. She gets on the phone with her daughter Anaya, her youngest daughter Anaya, that evening, and she makes no mention of this alleged stalker that she mentioned on her Twitter. When she gets off the phone with her daughter, Anaya does kind of feel a little bit uneasy, like something's off. She just doesn't feel like things are, they feel just slightly off. Steph, have you ever had a feeling like that where you're talking to somebody and you don't know why, but you just feel like something's not quite right?
Definitely. I've said here before on Murdering the Black, oftentimes I wonder, did they get that guttural feeling because of what ended up happening, like that hindsight, or was that an authentic feeling? It's sometimes hard to realize when it's kind of 2020, you're looking back at a situation. But yeah, definitely have gotten that feeling before.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's not always clear if it's hindsight or if it was in the moment. But either way, Anaya definitely had, or definitely recollects having this feeling the morning of August 17th, and the day goes on as it normally would for Deanna. She has a morning prayer call with her mother, and she says goodbye to her mom. Her mom says goodbye to her, which was strange because usually her mom would only say, "See you later." But on this call, she definitely said goodbye. And she assumed that Deanna was headed off to work to do her normal activities. She expected, even though they had their morning prayer call, she still expected to hear from Deanna by 10 a.m., which was typical. They had this standing call where Deanna would check in. She was like a mama's girl. She would talk to her mom throughout the day. And any mama's girls out there, they can relate to this. You just, you're constantly checking in with mama. You're constantly talking to mama. 10 a.m. comes and it goes, and she doesn't hear from Deanna. And she thought that was strange, but she didn't allow it to fluster her or, make her really blow up Deanna's phone at the time. But then the afternoon comes, and Anaya, her daughter, was expecting to see her because she had promised Anaya that she was going to bring her money to get her hair done that afternoon. And the afternoon comes and goes, and there's no word from Deanna. Now, of course, at this time, Anaya's texting her mom. She's blowing her mom's phone up. She's trying to get in contact with her. Now, Deanna's mom is also calling, and nobody can get in contact with Deanna. And of course, at this point, it's very strange, and they're very concerned, but not concerned enough to call the police. So 24 hours, at this point, it's August 18th, and it's Saturday. And they're still trying to get in touch with, Deanna, and they're still not able to get in contact with Deanna. And they don't know why. They start to just think, well, maybe she's not wanting to be bothered. There may have been instances before where Deanna would do that. And Deanna's mom says, if we don't see her at church tomorrow, on August the 19th, then we will go to her house to check in on her. We'll do that drive-by. And reluctantly, her daughters, they agree. So they get to church, and Deanna's not there. They leave church service early, but before they leave, they ask the pastor, will you pray with us? That Deanna's okay, and the pastor does.
They arrive at Deanna's house around 1:35 p.m., and once they get there, there's just red flags absolutely everywhere. They get out of the car, and the garage is in the front of the house, and so they see seeping through the garage floor is water. And of course, that's a red flag. They don't know where that's coming from. But in addition to, they see her 2 chihuahuas outside. And to know Deanna is to know she loved animals. She would never let her dogs be outside unaccompanied. They were very concerned. They get to the front door, and the front door is locked. Immediately, Vicky, who is Deanna's mother, decides something's not right. And they walk to the back door, hoping to gain entrance through the porch. And that door is locked too. But Deanna's sister sees through the glass window that there's water all throughout the house. This is the last red flag because Vicky, Deanna's mother, go ahead and just decides to grab her cell phone and call 911. She gets on the phone with 911 and she tells them, listen, I haven't talked to my daughter since August 17th. We don't know where she is. We're at her home presently, and there's water seeping through the garage, and there's water inside of the home, and we suspect that something's not right. Can you please send a police officer to the scene? And the 911 operator very calmly tells them, well, no, I can't. If she's missing, a police officer can't do anything to help you. Right? She begins to, frantically just tell her, listen, we don't know where she is. Can you just send a police officer? We would feel comfortable with you sending him so maybe we can gain entry into the house. They didn't know how this type of thing works. And she says, well, you need to call the hospital first, maybe get in contact with the constable. We can't just send a police officer. They can't help with that. And frustrated, Deanna's sister says, Mom, hang up the phone with them. I'm about to break down the front door. And so she kicks down the front door, and on the third push, it gives. Now, Anaya, who was the youngest daughter, is still in the back, hoping to gain entrance. But Vicky never hung up the phone with the 911 dispatcher, despite her daughter telling her to. And they walk into the house with Vicky going first, because once Deanna's sister kicked down the door, it was a foul odor coming from the house. And they didn't know if that was water, mildew. It just was too much. And so Vicky decided to walk in first. She walks in. And of course, they walk through the kitchen, walk through the living room, and there's water all around, actually covering their feet. And they get into the master bedroom of Deanna's house, which is her room. And it is an utter chaos. I mean, lamps thrown about, blankets, and her actual door to gain entry to her master bedroom was off of the hinges. So they knew a struggle ensued. Somebody had been in there fighting, and actively while they're looking, Vicky's still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. She's telling them everything that she sees. She says somebody has been in here struggling, and initially upon entry of the bedroom, she sees something on the bed, and she thought it was Deanna, but it wasn't. It was just a blanket. So she reluctantly walks towards the bathroom. When she gets inside of the bathroom, it is a horrific scene. The bath water is still running, and when she pulled back the curtain of the bathtub, they find Deanna in the bathtub, submerged in water, deceased. Now, Vicky was the first one who walked into that room, but right behind her was Anaya. And Anaya describes that she could not do anything. She was frozen with fear and utter shock. She just saw her mother laying in water, and she had been laying in water for days. So if you know anything about the decomposition of a body, it pulls on the water. When you're in water too long, you get those wrinkles in your hands. So imagine a body, a deceased body laying in that. Deanna did not look like herself. And slowly, right behind Anaya was Nicia. And Nicia just stayed there, and she was the one who couldn't take it anymore. She ran out. And when her sister comes up and sees her body, she immediately wants to turn off the water. Vicky screams to her, "Don't turn off the water. Get out of here." Now, I want to say that the 911 dispatcher is hearing all of this, and I'm sure Vicky just did not hear her, but when they found the body, she actually tells them on the 911 phone call, go outside, wait for detectives. I mean, could you stop after seeing your loved one deceased in a tub? So they go outside, and it takes the police another 20 minutes to arrive on scene. So investigators arrive on scene, and it's not initially clear if this was an accident or if someone killed her. So they really have to wait until they get an autopsy to really find out what happened to Deanna. Now, MD mentioned before that Deanna had 2 failed marriages. So let's unpack that for a second. Her first marriage, her youngest daughter, Anaya, says, and her oldest daughter, Nicia, says that there was one altercation inside of that marriage. And they didn't go into too much detail. They just said it was one altercation that happened that was kind of explosive. But ultimately, Deanna and the husband or ex-husband decided that it was best that they split because they just weren't meant to be together. But the second marriage, however, there was a lot of domestic violence. They married in 2008, and his name was Devecchio. And she had been with him for years. And a lot of the mental health issues, as well as the substance abuse that Deanna experienced, was a direct result of her being in this marriage with Del Vecchio. And it was very unhealthy. He really was abusing her physically and emotionally, but he also was doing the same thing to her children as well. He was trying to isolate Deanna from her family and her friends, and she kind of went through this cycle of abuse with him where she would have some pretty explosive moments with him. The police would be called, but she would never file charges. And there was one particular situation where her friend witnessed Vecchio actually assaulting her. She decided to go out on a night on the town just to get out and to get away. And it's unclear if she was separated from him or not, but her friend came over just to watch her kids. And as she's getting prepared to go out, Vecchio comes to the front door, bursts in, and starts beating on Deanna. He beats her so brutally that her friend comes into the room immediately and says, "Listen, stop." And his eyes were bloodshot red, and he was in a full-blown rage and said, "If you don't get away, I'm going to beat you too." She calls 911, they get out, and he doesn't stop beating her until the police arrive. They have to tase him to get him off of Deanna. And even then, Deanna did not file charges against him because she had to get to a point where it was the final straw. And she eventually did get there. And that's when we catch up with her in August of 2012. However, it was just this vicious cycle of abuse. But she had finally broken away from him and tried to stop the abuse and try to get out of that situation. So the police always have to investigate whether they know it's an accident or not. They are to investigate it as if it's a homicide, as if it's a crime. They have to. Upon hearing all of this information about Vecchio, they decide to go and bring him in. Vicky, Deanna's mother, knows exactly where his father lives. They know where to go and find him. And so they go, guns drawn, and find him at his father's house. And when they inquired just at his door, he said, "No, I had nothing to do with that. I don't know what you're talking about." But thankfully, he had warrants. And so they were able to arrest him and bring him in for further questioning because they realized after getting the autopsy results back that this was indeed a homicide. So just within an hour of finding Deanna's body, they brought Vecchio in, and her family arrived at the police station hoping to get more answers as well.
Once they arrived at the police station, one of the police officers, a sergeant, pulled Carlita, her sister, and he wanted to tell Carlita that they had found something. They had listened to something that they thought would definitely cause issues during this investigation. And he was referring to the 911 call that Deanna actually made on the day that she went missing on August 17th. Now, when Vicky, her mom, and Carlita and the family did the drive-by and they showed up at the house on August 17th, or 19th, and they're knocking on the door and they call 911. The 911 operator mentioned to Vicky that they had sent police officers out to that house a couple of days prior. Steph spoke about this. And so the family knew that a 911 call had been made earlier. That also is what added to the urgency of, please hurry up and send someone down here. But what the sergeant revealed to Carlita is that 911 call was way more serious than initially they thought it was once they listened to it. And so they wanted to give her a little bit of a heads up that what you're going to hear, what you're about to listen to, is really going to be very disturbing, to say the least. And so when they sit down and listen to that 911 call, what they hear, her family, is subjected to listen to, is that Deanna called 911 as she was being attacked. She was screaming and pleading for help. Now, in this 911 call, the 911 operator does what any 911 operator does. Says, this is 911, how may I help you? Deanna never responds to the 911 caller because she's not able to. Because as the 911 operator gets on the line, you hear Deanna telling someone to leave her alone and get out and why are you here? And she begins to make pleas like, why are you doing this? And she's screaming. And you are able to hear in this 911 call all the events that lead up to Deanna's murder. And it is 11 minutes long, and it is disturbing, it is infuriating, and it is senseless. Because what ends up happening during that 911 call is that the operator continues to ask Deanna, do you need fire, police, or ambulance? Do you need fire, police, or ambulance? Again, Deanna never, ever responds to the 911 operator because she can't. She's very literally screaming for her life. Never once does the 911 operator ask if she's okay. Never once does the 911 operator decide to put Deanna on hold while she dispatches police to her residence. Instead, the 911 operator sits on the line for 11 minutes. At the conclusion of the call, the 911 operator does notify the police, but never does the 911 operator tell the police that there was a person on the line screaming for help, that there was a person that seemed to be in dire need. You should get there immediately. So the police officers that are dispatched to Deanna's residence, they make 2 stops along the way. They stopped for a alleged armory that may have been in progress, and then they stop and they get some water at a gas station. They finally arrive to Deanna's residence about 50 minutes after the call. And when they arrive, they simply knock on the door. Of course, no one answers, and they leave. Steph, why don't you tell us what was transpiring on the call as she was screaming?
This call was made on August 17th, a little after she got off that phone call, that prayer line with her mother. It took place at 10:54 a.m. And as she is screaming, she's saying, hey, Red, why are you doing this? She's literally asking him to stop. On the phone call, calls him baby. She's like, please stop. I'm not doing anything to you. And then she actually calls his name. She says, Davecchio, stop. And all of this is happening. And you also hear simultaneously the 911 operator saying, what's the address? What's the address? She just keeps repeating that. And you also hear just screams, her pleading for her life. And then you start to hear in the background water running. Davecchio starts to taunt her. Now, where is the police? Where is the police now? Where is the police? And then from there, you just hear water. And it is believed that he began to drown her in the bathtub where they found her. They believe that he beat her in the master bedroom where they saw all of that chaos in the room where it looked like there was an obvious struggle. And then in the bathroom, he killed her by drowning. And you just hear water rushing in the background, and you hear her 2 chihuahuas barking. And he says, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you. And the police have everything they need in this one phone call because the murder lasted 11 minutes. And Carlitha and her family, Vicky, her mother, couldn't even get through the call. They eventually had to stop this phone call. And this was explosive. This was explosive to the city of Dallas. It showed negligence on Dallas Police Department and the 911 operators who took both of those phone calls, not only the one that Deanna made, obviously that day of the murder, but also the call that her mother made. The 911 operator did not handle that call correctly. And so this 911 call was released all over the Metroplex. I mean, it was damning to the law enforcement community because if you can't call 911 for help, if you can't call the police for help, my God, who can you call? The police chief, who at the time was David Brown, he was a black man, I have to say that. He had to get on and address all of this controversy that was going on. And as a result of this investigation and all that had came out about the 911 phone calls, he fired the operator who conducted the call with Deanna. She was fired. And the one who conducted the phone call with Vicky was suspended. And so this was huge. It made such a huge impact. And Mike Rawlins, who was the mayor of Dallas at the time, commenced to doing an initiative about domestic violence. And the DPD, they had to admit wrongdoing. I mean, he was right there on the phone call for everyone to hear. It was undeniable. And we'll go a little bit more into the lawsuit that the family did file against Dallas Police Department and the 911 operators. But they had to go to trial first. And believe it or not, while you might think there was a trial, it's right there. It was indeed a trial. And a lot of that centered around that 911 call. And the family had to relive that through the trial because Vicky had to get on the stand and testify, as well as her two daughters.
Like Steph said, you would think that there wouldn't be a trial. The evidence was so damning. However, there was a trial. And at trial, the defense attorneys really, to me, almost negligently so, began to try to disparage Deanna and her character. They began to try to point to the fact that there was, in fact, an incident between her and Delvecchio where she actually was arrested and went to jail. So they had some domestic violence event where she ended up stabbing him and she went to jail. But when they had their trial, when she had her trial, the judge dismissed it because he believed that it was in self-defense. And so they tried, the defense attorneys tried to use that particular situation against Deanna to try to, in some way, shape, fashion, or form, create this narrative that Delvecchio was enticed or he was, in some way caused to act out against Deanna when he ended up doing what he did. They also tried to paint a picture that her mental issues that she had in her life was the cause of this, that she really, in fact, drowned herself, and that she was hallucinating when she made this call, and that was not real and reality. Now, that is just absolutely absurdity when you listen to the 911 call, because you very literally hear Delvecchio. So I don't know if they were trying to basically say she was both voices and she was pretending and then she drowned herself. But either way, and the reason I say that they negligently did this, painted this picture, how dare you disparage the victim? But either way, the prosecution in this case, they stood their ground, and they did, to me, what I thought was really just brilliant as attorneys is when you understand your case, your job as an attorney is to understand both the weaknesses and the strengths of your case. That's your job. And so you want to be able to foresee what the other side will argue. And you do this in several ways. You do this by studying your case. You do this by having mock trials where you have someone pretend to be the other side, your opponent. And so the prosecution in this case, they understood the weaknesses in their case very well. So much and so that they knew that it was a potential that they would try to disparage their victim. They knew that they would try to paint some of these negative things that occurred in her life, or some of these challenges that occurred in her life in a negative way. And so what they did is they got ahead of those issues, and they, in their case in chief, decided to bring those out to the forefront on their side. So they didn't wait for the defense to bring it up. They brought it up. Yes, we know that Deanna struggled with mental health, had mental health struggles. Yes, we know that Deanna also went to jail, but it was ultimately determined that it was in self-defense. Yes, we know that Deanna is not the quote-unquote perfect victim here. But that does not excuse and it does not diminish what Delvecchio did. And so I thought that was brilliant of the prosecution in this case. And ultimately, the jury sided with the prosecution, and Delvecchio was found guilty of murder, of first-degree murder. And he received 85 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2045, where he would be 69 years old if he, in fact, ever did get parole.
In terms of the family, I was really just shocked by their humility. Vicky, Deanna's mother, said that she forgave Del Vecchio and she prays for him. And in terms of if she thinks it's fair or not, the actual sentence that he received, she said, well, it's up to God. And I just really admired what she had to say. But more importantly, I think they were determined to make sure that Deanna's legacy lived on. And that's so critical in an important situation like this. Now, they came up with a nonprofit organization called Deanna's Voice, and they give scholarships to youth and to women because domestic violence is all throughout everybody's community. And they decided to use her story to bring more awareness. And really what the phone call that they discovered that she made, what it really showed is that the 911 operating system had a problem. And there were disparities within the Black community when it comes to responses as far as domestic violence here in Dallas. And if it's here, it's everywhere. And because Deanna lived in South Dallas and you're familiar with Dallas, you know that that is not the nicest part of Dallas. It's not. And it had some crime. And because of that, like it or not, that is why they were so slow to get there. That's why they didn't feel the need to ensure that police officers got out there. That's why the 911 operator just dropped the ball. And so as a result of Deanna's phone call being released to the public, as a precaution now when 911 operators are trained, they have to hear Deanna's phone call. And no matter what, when a domestic violence call is made, police have the authority to kick in the door. And I just thought that was amazing that through this tragic situation, effective change would be put in place to protect other women.
The family did file a civil lawsuit against the city of Dallas, the police officers, the 911 operators, for gross negligence in their failure to respond and show up, quite honestly. That's not legal jargon, right? Like that's our everyday common nomenclature. But they did file a lawsuit. This lawsuit did end up inevitably getting dismissed by a district judge who dismissed the lawsuit on the basis of sovereign immunity. Now, some of you are probably sitting over there saying, what is sovereign immunity? So I want to explain sovereign immunity. So sovereign immunity is a legal doctrine where it basically says that a state or a governmental entity cannot be liable for the wrongdoings of their employees. Okay, so it's basically saying that even if, and this was the argument that the city of Dallas made, that even if our employees were grossly negligent, that negligence is not what killed Deanna, and we invoke sovereign immunity. And now this is a legal doctrine that has existed for years upon years upon years, right? And so as a result of that, the judge sided with the city of Dallas and they dismissed the lawsuit. The family did appeal that lawsuit, and we were able to find an article about them appealing the lawsuit in 2019. However, there's nothing else out there about whether or not the lawsuit, whether they won their appeal or they lost the appeal. It's likely that with there not being much else out there, that they probably did not win their appeal and it stalled out or what have you. And it's just really unfortunate because while sovereign immunity is a legal doctrine that can and is enforced oftentimes and rightfully enforced, I just do not agree fundamentally that but for the gross negligence of the 911 operator, that Deanna would still be dead. I think that it's unclear. And, Steph, interested in your thoughts, but for me, it's unclear as to whether or not Deanna could still be dead. If that 911 operator heard Deanna screaming and initially engaged and dispatched officers with a sense of urgency that there is something happening, there's a woman on this line screaming, this is her residence, get there now, and she did that within seconds or minutes of the phone call, how do we know that Deanna would still be dead? We don't know that. And I don't think that anybody can say that with a level of certainty, not from anything that I've seen in our research of this case. Steph, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's just a huge what if. So you can't say unless you go back to the future like they did in the movie. You have no idea of the possible outcome. So I just think that still the family has no true closure in this situation. And the article that we're referencing was 2019. They still hadn't received any. It was tied up in the courts. And the city of Dallas hired outside counsel to the tune of $350,000 to defend this lawsuit. So it's just so severely unfortunate because they said, hey, it's wrongdoing here. We did wrong. We messed up. We dropped the ball. And while money does not make situations go away, there is some semblance of justice. So it's just, Carlitha, Deanna's sister, said this quote. She said, 3 generations should not have seen Deanna in that tub deceased. They should not have found their sister, her mother, and a daughter deceased. That's trauma that they'll never be able to recover from. And I can't even begin to imagine the horror. But I will say, in conclusion of this case, before we get into the takeaways, they said that her youngest daughter, Anaya, went on to become a professional volleyball player across seas. And so the life that she so desired for her 2 youngest children, they were able to have. And I think Deanna would be proud of the women that her daughters were raised to be. And that is the case of Deanna Cook. Let's get into our takeaway.
So my takeaway is, Steph and I were discussing just this case and how it enraged me. I was very enraged after watching it. I actually, though I live in Dallas, was not familiar with this case. And when I think back on it, like, why did I not hear about it? And I think a lot of the reason is because in 2012, I was very much sick, throwing up, pregnant with my firstborn. I have a disorder called hyperemesis, and one day I'll do a behind the paid wall subscription podcast about my disorder that I have when I get pregnant. Either way, this was my first time in researching this case, learning about it and knowing how close it was, is always it adds a little bit more interest. It adds a little bit more mystique, so to speak. And one of the things that I was saying to Steph is, it is so unfortunate that people don't take value and pride in their job. And, sometimes we think when we don't have the supervisory role, or we don't have the managerial role, or we're not at the top of the food chain, that we don't have the power to really enact change like maybe we think the person that is at the top does. But that could not be further from the truth. These 911 operators, though they may not have been at the top of the food chain, these 911 operators could have been change agents within their job and within their position. They absolutely could have changed some of the systematic problems that obviously prevailed within the 911 and that city of Dallas, the police officers and all of that. They could have enacted some change. When that 911 officer first answered the phone when Deanna called, she could have taken pride. She chose to treat Deanna's call the same way the systematic culture that was prevalent within that organization treated all calls from the hood, from the poor side of town. And it's just unfortunate because it doesn't have to be like that. Maybe she couldn't change the systematic issues that existed within the 911 operations within the city of Dallas, but maybe she could have saved Deanna, or she could have treated each call that she was on with the same amount of love, care, respect that she would have wanted somebody to treat her family, her friends, her loved ones. And I say all that to say, we've got to take pride in the small jobs, in the little jobs, in our role and our responsibility, no matter how great or how small. We can be change agents no matter where we are. We can effectuate change in the smallest ways. because we don't know when that one thing that we decide that we're going to do different, that we recognize it needs to be different, could save a person's life. And in this situation, we'll never know if had she treated that call with the same amount of love, consideration, and respect that she would have treated anybody that she loved, how that would have played out differently for Deanna and her family. We'll never know that. When you go to your jobs, if you're a bagger at a grocery store, or if you are the CEO of Walmart, you still have to treat your job with the same amount of love, care, and respect, and be a change agent on your job where you see there needs to be change in your organization.
I really looked at the end of this case with knowledge about this case. I was aware of the case, and I kind of was unclear about what happened with the lawsuit. So for me, I knew everything concerning this case, but it was a full circle moment finding out about the lawsuit and what actually happened. And that was very disappointing. But for me, it really just brings a highlight moment for myself that systemic racism still exists, right? And I know you're probably saying, Steph, no brainer, obviously. I'm concerned. You have cases like Timothy Coggins, and that happened in the 80s where this man is killed, and a hate crime. And we know that existed back in the old days, so to speak. But to know that the systemic racism is funneling all the way into a 911 call because they had the technology in 2012 to immediately dispatch police officers to that location. They knew her address. They didn't even really need it. If you're not a part of the Black community, can you understand why we don't trust police officers? Why we're very hesitant? We don't want to ask them for help, because you could point to this situation and several others and others that are happening in present day and say, my God, this is why. And we have such a tumultuous history, police, with law enforcement. Unfortunately, this speaks to why my heart truly goes out to the Cook family. I'm happy to know that her family picked up the torch and raised her children, but they will never be the same. Their lives are forever changed. And I just think this particular case speaks to why we have to continue to highlight cases like this here on Murder in the Black. I had somebody earlier on, like, we've only been around for, I think this is our 4th year podcasting, but when I started the first year, somebody came and gave her critique, which, by the way, I read those. And she left a review, which I was appreciative of. She said, I was so excited to find out about your podcast. I enjoyed several episodes, but then I started to see that you guys were just covering, the husband killed, the wife killed. And I feel like y'all could actually cover a wide range of true crime. And I agree with her. We just so happened to be at that time covering a lot of Fatal Attraction episodes because a producer reached out to us. But domestic violence and a husband, beating his wife or vice versa, that's a story that we have to keep telling here on Murder in the Black, because it's an epidemic. It's happening all around us constantly. And until it stops, that's when I'll stop covering these cases. This will never get old to me here on Murder in the Black, because it brings awareness to the fact that this is going on. Somebody in your family has been a part of it. You may have been a part of a domestic abuse situation and you managed to get out. And so I feel like this particular case is near and dear to my heart, not just because of what we're seeing currently, right, in the atmosphere with Diddy dragging Cassie and abusing her brutally, but because it happens all the time. And if it can happen to Deanna, it can happen to anybody that you know, maybe even you. That's our case. Share this episode. If you enjoyed it and you thought it meant something, share this episode with friends and family. We will have the hotline number for the domestic abuse hotline. If you find yourself in a situation where you need to get out, there is help. You're not by yourself. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black, and we will see you next week.
If you or someone you love is in a domestic abuse relationship, there is hope. Call 1-800-799-7233.